Welcome to another episode of I Can Alteryx That with coaches Alex and John. I'm John. Today, we're going to cover Alteryx Weekly Challenge number 223, Going Nuclear. Let's get started. Alright, so this week's challenge. I don't think it's particularly difficult, but there's a bunch of steps and we get to use some reporting tools at the end, which I think is always good practice. And so I'm pretty sure I fall in the majority here that I don't use reporting tools very frequently, and they can be kind of confusing to use, especially if you don't practice them a lot. But in any case, this week's challenge is called, what was it called? Something nuclear. So our goal here is to take these 4 input sources. It has to do with nuclear power plants. So we got this first one right here. It's a JSON file. And if you're not familiar with that, what you end up getting is we have these 2 columns, JSON name and JSON value string, where the name has a prefix of a number, and you can think of that as like an ID field. So this will be ID 0, ID 1, ID 2, and so on. Then the value string is the actual value for that ID's whatever field name we're talking about. The second part of the JSON name, so this is the name of the 0 ID, the latitude of the 0 ID, and you can see those are repeated for each unique ID. So the way that I saw this, the easiest way I think, we can grab a text to columns here, and let's just go back to that initial data source. You can see that we have the ID field, a period, and then the field name, and that's going to be consistent across all records. So what we can do is split this into 2 separate columns based on that period. So we'll split the JSON name, the period delimiter, into 2 columns. And you can see that when we do that, we now have columns named 1 and 2. We won't worry about what they're named for now. Where 1 is going to be our ID field, and 2 is our field name field. Just going to move this out of the way. And so the next thing that we can do is grab a Crosstab tool, and we're going to reshape the data into a more traditional layout. So we're going to group by the field named number 1. That's our ID field. Our column headers will come from 2, and our values will be the value string. And we'll just pick concatenate, although it doesn't matter which one we select here. We could do concatenate first or last and get the same records no matter what. So you can see here we now have our ID field called number 1. Things like capacity, construction started date, country codes, IDs, all sorts of stuff in alphabetical order. But we won't worry about that either. So now let's go ahead and look at our other inputs. We have country code, just a simple lookup table saying what the 2-letter country lookup codes represent. For example, BJ represents African country of Benin, BM is Bermuda, and so on. We have a status lookup table. We have status codes 0 through 9, and then corresponding statuses, and then another lookup table for reactor types, going from 1 through 25. We have the advanced boiling water reactors, fast breeder reactors, all the way through traveling wave reactors. And so our goal is to take those 4 data sources and do 2 things. Create a map that shows operational, planned, and under construction reactors, color-coded. And then underneath that, a table where we group by country, count the number of operational reactors, sum their total capacity, and then identify what the most common type of reactor is in that country. So now that we've reshaped our data, what we need to do is join in these 3 lookup tables. What I remember noticing on the status lookup and the reactor type, we have integers, and then later on we're going to have to sum the capacity field, and furthermore we have to map these things, and you can see we have latitude and longitude. So let's go ahead and grab a select tool. Now let's just go ahead and make sure that our data types are set appropriately. So capacity we can set as an integer. Let's make that 32 int 32 just in case. And we don't care about the date. Latitude and longitude, let's make both of those doubles. And then our ID field. So reactor type ID will make that an integer, and status ID will make that an integer as well. So now let's go ahead and just quickly join these three data sets. So country codes. We will join these on country code equals country code, and we will deselect the country code from the right source. We don't need two of them. We'll repeat this process for the status lookup table, where we're now joining status ID down here with status code, and again we're going to deselect status code since that's duplicate information that we don't need. And then finally we'll join in the reactor types following the exact same logic. The left will be reactor type ID, the right will be type code, and we will deselect type code. Now if we go ahead and run this workflow, you can see we have 778 records. We've got our lats and longs, we've got our countries, their status, types, and descriptions. So now let's go back up and read the description, because up here it says what we're interested in. A map showing the locations of reactors with a status of operational, under construction, or planned. So let's go ahead and make a filter for those three statuses. And the field name where that's going to come from is the status field. So we can do a custom filter, and we'll say where status is in operational, comma, under construction, and then planned. And notice that these are all in title case, although they're written in lowercase in the description. So let's run this and see what we filtered out. Okay, so now we have 600 records there. And we also, let's look down, only include reactors with a set location. And if we look at this data, we can see that some reactors, like records 5, 6, and 7, don't have any latitudes and longitudes. So of course we could do this in the same filter, but I'm just going to grab a second filter tool here. And we'll just say where latitude is not null. And that's working under the assumption that if a latitude is null, then the corresponding longitude will also be null. So we've now got our 562 records. So let's go ahead. We don't have a spatial field, so we have to create one, and we could do that with a formula tool. But I'm going to go ahead and just do the create points tool from the spatial tool palette. It automatically grabs the longitude and latitude correctly. Let's go ahead and run this and look at our map just to see, eyeball it and see if it looks correct. Okay, so we've got, let's just see, 3 in South America, 3 in the western US, 1 in Mexico, 1 in South Africa, 1 in northern Russia over here, and then 1 way out in northeastern Russia. And looking at the output map over here, we got 3 in the western US, 3 South America, 1 in Africa, 1 in Mexico, northwestern Russia, and northeastern Russia. So I think our maps are consistent. So let's go ahead and actually create the map. So on the reporting tool palette, grab the report map tool. And honestly, I think this is the most challenging part of the entire challenge right here. So let's go ahead and set a reference base map of the most recent vintage Alteryx Lite. Was there a scale on this? I don't remember. Okay, so there is a scale. So we'll just keep all the other options on their default. So now what we have to do is go to the data tab right here within the report map tool. Incoming connections number 1. Spatial field is centroid, or you could just leave it on all spatial objects since we only have the one spatial object. Now here we need, because we're coloring by the status, our thematic field here needs to be that status field. And now we'll go over to layers on the next tab, and we're going to add a point layer from number 1. That's our data source. And what we need to do is expand this drop down on number 1, and let's go to theme. So these are the default settings, and these would not work for what we want to do. So you need to change your tile method to unique value. And because we're coloring categorical variables, these status strings rather than numerics, let's change our color method to map. Then from there you can choose a color map that you want. I think let's go with summer here. And then let's just go ahead and run this and see what we get. That should be sufficient to give us a map with our 3 colors that we want. And this time you see now we have a report tab, so we'll go to that. Alright, so now you can see that we have our map. We got a yellow for operational, a light blue for planned, and a darker blue for under construction. So I think that will do nicely for the report map. So now let's go ahead and move on and create our table. So if you remember the table, let's look at this output again. We're grouping by each country and counting the number of operational reactors. We're summing the total capacity and we're finding the most common type. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect another filter tool to this one where we're doing the latitude filter. And we're going to do where status is now only operational, since that's all we care about for the table. And so the next thing that we need to do is group by, well, summarize, but within the summarize, we're going to group by the country. We need to count the number of operational reactors. So let's just count the country right here, and we'll call this operational reactors. I think that was the name of it. And we need to sum the capacity. And it was called, or named total capacity in the table. So if we go ahead and run this right now, that's going to give us 3 of the 4 columns that we need in our final table. Just to check, United States, 98, and a capacity of 93,857. And in our output up here, we've got the US at 98, capacity 93,857. Alright, so it looks like we've done our summarization correct. So now we need to do the most common type. So for that, I'm going to grab another summarize tool. And this time, let's go back a little bit to over here. The type comes from the description field. So what we're going to do is group by country again. We're going to group by description, and then we're going to count how frequently each of those descriptions occurs. And just to show you what we get from that summarization, we'll run this. So you can see, for example, the United States has 2 different types of reactors. 33 boiling water reactors and 65 pressurized water reactors. So now what we want to do, so we have to grab for each record the highest count. Or for each country the highest count, I should say. So let's go ahead and sort this. We'll group by country, or we'll sort by country and count. So country, the order doesn't matter, but count needs to be in descending for each country. And then what we're going to do is grab a sample tool. We're going to do first n rows where n equals 1, grouping by country. So since we sorted each country in descending order based on the count, by sampling and just grabbing the first record per country will give us the most common reactor type. And when we run this sample tool should have 31 records, just like what we have in the browse tool. So now we can see that for each country, what the most common reactor type is. So now let's go ahead, join these 2 streams back together on the country field. Deselect right country. We don't even need the description. Oh, pardon me, we do. We don't need the count, I'm sorry. And we'll call this most common type. Go ahead and run that just to make sure everything looks good. Alright, one more thing that we want to do. The table was in order of operational reactors. So we will sort this by operational reactors in descending order. And now our data set here should match the table exactly. US 98, France 58, China 46. And let's just verify that those three are good. 98, 58, 46 for US, France, and China. So I think we're good there. So now what we have to do is build our table and then join the table and the map together to create a single report. So we'll grab a table from the reporting tool palette. And we don't have to do anything here. Because we arranged our data correctly beforehand, we can just pass it into the table tool. And you can see that we now have our table. And the cool thing is, it automatically gives you the commas inside of a numeric field. So we didn't have to do like the toString function or anything like that to format this. That's nice. So now the last thing that we should do is grab a union tool, union the two reporting, I guess what I'll call snippets together. Then finally, once they've been unioned together, we can grab a layout tool. Since we connected the map to the union first and then the table second, by default, they will be in that order with the map on top of the table. So if we just go ahead and run this without changing any of the settings in the layout tool, and check out our browse, you can see right there, oops, we have our map, our legend, and then our table below. And we could call it quits right now, but I want to show you one more thing. A little tiny bit of formatting. You can see here, their table is, it's kind of centered within the map, whereas ours, the table stretches out to the outsides. What we can do for that is back on the basic table tool, we can change our table width. And I believe if we set it to about 75, we'll be pretty close to the solution output. So now you can see that our table is, pushed inwards a bit more. And of course, you could play around with the settings to try to get the output, but I think we're close enough at this point. So there you have it. There's my solution to Alteryx Weekly Challenge number 223. Thanks for watching. As always, thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the Data Coach channel for more awesome lessons on Alteryx and all things data analytics and visualization. Follow Data Coach on Twitter at AskTessellation and follow me personally at jemery_dataviz. Thanks again.